The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast, where we love to talk about lighting controls. This episode is sponsored by McWong International Incorporated, which is one of the pioneers in Bluetooth mesh controls solutions out there for lighting controls. They provide a comprehensive DLC certified product offering lists, and they are code compliant solutions for new and retrofit constructions. So if you're listening to this episode, which is with code official, and you're trying to figure out what to do next for your projects, you should check out McWong International Incorporated for some fantastic lighting controls products.
Yeah, so be sure to check out mcwonginc.com for more information, and you can see everything that Webster just talked about on their website. I would like to remind everyone that this episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and financially supported by NAIL, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. And please do not forget to check out the lightingcontrolspodcast.com, where you can hear previous episodes, you can get some more information about us, you can get yourself some sweet merch. And please do not forget, you can follow us on your favorite streaming platforms on YouTube. Find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you guys want to get your information. We are there to help you. And now we've got Kelly Cunningham coming to us from PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. And she's going to talk about some code compliance stuff with us and some of the new changes that just happened with the 2022 update that went live in January. So here we go.
All right, well, welcome to the Lighting Controls Podcast, everyone. And today we have a special guest, Kelly Cunningham. Kelly, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I work for Pacific Gas and Electric on the Codes and Standards team. And the reason I care so much about lighting controls is, number one, I have a background in lighting prior to PG&E. Number two, it's part of the California Energy Code. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the Energy Code and also working on research that's going to inform the next versions of it for the state.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. And, you know, I think a lot of people look at energy codes and just kind of either scratch their heads or go, well, why do we need to do this now? Or, you know, and I think what's really interesting about your position is you're really on the front lines. You get to see everything as it's developing and then before it gets released. So just curious, you know, from your perspective, what does Energy Code do primarily?
Energy Code sets the floor in a way. Some tongue-in-cheek call it the worst building you can build in the state of California. And if we're talking about ASHRAE or IECC, it also sets a minimum. It's supposed to be like, hey, look, industry, we can do at least this good. We can at least have this lighting energy power budget for these spaces. We can at least add these controls so that we're not using energy when it's not needed for different systems, including lighting. So at the very least, that's what it does. But it also slowly pushes forward. It doesn't wait for industry or the users to say, okay, I'm gonna make something the new normal on my own. If enough forward-thinking people install systems in the building, or if the industry releases something that's a really important advancement and it's time for it to be for everyone, then every 3 years in California, the Energy Code gets a refresh, and the lighting sections are part of that. So it also moves the needle a little bit on a triennial cycle in California. And every time 90.1 and IECC do an update as well, it just moves a little bit more forward so that we are not using energy we don't need.
So, I mean, from the standpoint of a utility, for instance, you know, the benefit seems to be when it comes to energy code is the saving of energy. But, you know, if I'm looking at it from a business standpoint, ultimately energy code is going to reduce the amount of money that I'm charging for because people are using less energy. So, you know, how does that benefit me as a utility?
Oh, that's a really great question. And for your listeners outside of California, here we have investor-owned utilities, which are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And we have kind of a separation in duties and in work that we do. And I'm on the energy efficiency team. So, our goal is to reduce energy use in all new buildings and major retrofits for the people. And our funding comes from the ratepayers. And I want to make sure that I'm spending that as effectively as possible so that everyone can benefit. So how it benefits the utility is we get to, at PG&E, advance towards our goal of making sure that we keep people and the planet in mind, in addition to any types of profit that the company may enjoy from any of our transmission, distribution, or generation sales. So that planet and the people still matter, and I use energy efficiency dollars to try to do the most good. And sometimes you have to invest in the sticks in addition to the carrots. So although the utility is known for incentives, at PG&E and at the other investor-owned utilities like Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric, we also invest in making sure that the code advances to where it needs to be.
So, I mean, ultimately, if I'm just a resident or a commercial building owner in California and I'm paying a specific rate, a portion of that goes towards the initiatives that are behind energy codes so that these sorts of benefits from energy savings are eventually rolled back to the occupants of these buildings. It's not just a one directional payment where it goes straight to the utility and that's it. It's kind of a cycle that goes on here.
There are cycles, and there's also other pots of money that kind of roll together into opportunities for both the utilities and the California Energy Commission to try and do some societal good with some of these funds that are collected.
So that's really interesting because I think not all groups, especially state-based groups, are following this model, and it's really fascinating to kind of look at California as its own sort of example of a really cool idea that really has this self-fulfilling cycle to be able to achieve a really energy efficient outcome. And so, from the standpoint, where do the new ideas come from? Where does okay, let's start using occupancy vacancy sensors, where does that idea originate?
So also, to be clear, we don't own the code. The California Energy Commission does. So the California Energy Commission is the one that makes those final decision on all those ideas that you collect to roll into proposals. So at the beginning of a code cycle, after the last one is adopted and everyone celebrated and said, we had some wins, we had some losses, but overall it's an advancement. We start to go out to the public, to our experts that we already know, and to try and find the experts that we don't know and collect ideas, to go to manufacturing partners, partner associations, designers, architects, code officials, and say, what's ready for codification? What do you see out there that could be a good advancement? Or what's not quite ready yet that maybe is going to be too much of a burden to bear for the building industry? So the investor-owned utilities group, the one that I lead for the Title 24 research, we collect all those together and we start culling through them and to try and find ones that have real potential. And these are the ones that make it to the Energy Commission's inbox and to meetings where they can look through them and say, yeah, we're interested in you pursuing this. And if you take this all the way to a solid proposal, it has a chance of getting through. So we try to reach out to all those stakeholders in order to collect those ideas.
So it's a communal effort. It's not just in a vacuum, which I'm sure a lot of people imagine that just somebody in the back room going, well, let's do this now and let's try that and see if that works. So it's good to hear that, you're really grabbing all of the stakeholders and saying, hey, what is the next step forward? So, when it comes to the 2025 code, for instance, what are we looking at that's coming on the horizon?
Well, for the 2025 code, we're actually taking a light touch on lighting because some of the best practices are now more mature, And we've seen a slowdown in our efficacy increases in LEDs.
Mhm.
And so we're, for the first time in a while, not taking a deep dive into lighting power density increases, or decreases, I should say,
Yeah,
increases
sure.
in stringency. Um, we are still looking for really innovative things for controls. We do think that there's some advancements in daylighting controls that would allow us to reduce the number of exceptions so that more spaces will have to have daylighting controls, and will benefit from the reductions that would happen during daylight hours. But we're taking a little bit more of a light touch on the 2025 code. And we are also looking to our other statewide programs. The program that I'm involved in, as I mentioned, the other utilities, we all kind of pitch in resources to make these code proposals happen. There's also emerging technologies programs, and there's also still a lot of funding for lighting advancements. So we're going to be looking to those two programs to really show us where the innovation is for the code cycle after that for 2028. And we're hoping that for lighting controls, we're going to see more networks, proof that over time that the users are really reaping the benefits energy-wise and also user amenity-wise. But for 2025, I don't have any big, splashy, exciting news other than the lighting industry is doing, a pretty good job of using the tools it has.
Well, that's awesome to hear because, as far as energy code cycles go, there's definitely times where it's like, this is a massive drop. And it's like, okay, now we need to shift our focus completely to accommodate this new code. But, with this new cycle, I think a lot of engineers might breathe a sigh of relief that there's not going to be that significant of a change. There might be some LPD adjustments here and there, but, it I'm sure there's a growth period where people can just go, okay, fine. Ah, let's just do, code minimum and then expand on that. But, it's not this huge heavy lift to learn the new code.
Or do better than code because it's
Sure.
possible based on that innovation. Um, there is one thing that the larger lighting community that's is working on, though, is cleanup. We have a partner team, Energy Code Ace, that is out on the front lines, educating and informing and offering resources to those to sort out all those requirements that you said the engineers would probably breathe a sigh of relief that there won't be massive change. They're also collecting information on, this section's hard to understand, or why do we have 27 pages on this? Some years ago, the Energy Commission did a great job of cleaning up that lighting alterations section, but maybe it could be done even a little more. Or with the bifurcation of the multifamily requirements from the non-res requirements and single family requirements last cycle, maybe that could be cleaned up so it's really honors the multifamily space. So cleanup is actually really important from my perspective this cycle. It's not at the core of the work that I'm doing, but there's other groups out there working hard to let the Energy Commission know that a few adjustments could make this a lot easier to understand. The California Energy Alliance is working on this, as well as the California Lighting Technology Center at UC Davis.
Well, and I think that that's something that really, as a nation and an industry as a whole, we should really be modeling after, because it's not just implementation; it's follow through with that implementation. And I think California, again, when it comes to this, it's almost like a gold standard for energy code implementation, because when you look at other states and other energy code requirements, you don't see this level of follow through. Energy Code Ace is a great example for this. I think the resources they generate are fantastic and really could be modeled after for other energy code resources, so that engineers in other states or other countries can really take advantage and understand the code as a whole, as opposed to having to read the documentation and try to figure out, okay, what does this mean? I think a lot of people, when they read code for the first time especially, they get lost. They get very confused by what is being said, how the language is used. And so having a follow through to make sure that it's understood, or how do we clarify this in a better way? How do we clean up that language? Having the cleanup team is a really great option that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of.
Yeah, and the team that I work on, we're also involved in ASHRAE 90.1. We have some representatives on 189, as well as IECC, to look across the model codes and say, is there a reason that they're dissimilar? Is there a reason that space types or requirements or even exception thresholds, can they be similar? And I'm hoping that that will also reduce confusion across the national marketplace. So sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes there might be a little more energy savings here, or with the higher energy prices in California, something's cost effective, but it's not going to work somewhere else. It's not going to work in Ohio or Florida. So instead, we have a slightly different requirement. But harmonization, when it makes sense, I think could also help. And I love that you think the Energy Code ACE resources are helpful. The what's new and what's changed, for example, for the 2022 cycle, which just started this month. I find them great resources. And I hope that the engineers who may be listening to this podcast will download those and even for the 2022 cycle, see that the lighting changes are improvements, but not the, oh no, I have to learn all this new stuff. The dreaded
No, totally.
2013 redo.
For those of you who are watching the video, here's an example of a resource that Energy Code ACE creates, which is a little dial that you can kind of circle around, basically take a look and see, what the spaces and the requirements of those spaces are. They really generate some fantastic resources. This wasn't even scripted. Like, I just have this on my desk for some reason, but they're really great resources. So I can't sing their praises enough. But again, this is specific to California. This is not specific. This does not transcend to any other state in the United States or even into Canada. So when it comes to this, personally, I would love to see this kind of stuff for Massachusetts, which is where I'm at, and really across the board in the entire United States, because of the fact that it's just such a helpful resource to be able to evaluate energy code. But
I am hoping that some of the federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, there's language in some of the funding that's there right now on the table for code compliance and for local jurisdictions and for regions of the country. I would love to see some of this be available for either enforcement officials or practitioners to try and bring some of these resources to other areas of the country if they don't already exist.
Yeah, so I guess sort of piggybacking on that, we obviously see that a lot of what happens in California slowly makes its way across the country. So I'm curious, do you get a lot of different organizations, whether it's states or municipalities, that reach out to you as they look forward at redoing their energy codes to sort of get a feeling of what worked, what didn't work, what's working well as they start to develop their new standards?
I have received some inquiries in the past. The questions about the lighting and lighting controls sections from other parts of the country in terms of local governments haven't been as frequent lately. I think with the LED revolution now being standard, then I think that some of the initial confusion has dissipated. I do get some questions about the other parts of the code that feed into the energy systems, such as photovoltaics and storage requirements. So that is a hot topic. So the things
photovoltaic
that
being solar cells and storage being like batteries to store the energy of those solar cells.
Yeah, mostly batteries. And then there's also other thermal energy storage options, such as hot water and in some cases ice. But the majority of them is batteries. So that's right. Solar and batteries. Lots of questions on those right now.
Well, and I think, again, with the initiatives that are coming from the federal government, probably makes sense that people are now going, whoa, how can I take advantage of this? But I think also it's emergent technology. That's the newest stuff. I think, when it comes to LEDs, like you said, we're kind of past the emergence of that.
We are, but I always, whenever I have a chance to say it, I feel compelled to do so, is that there's still no reason to have that illumination when no humans or no machinery needs it to be on. So even though you can store the energy, there's a loss between generation and storage. Even though that you can generate with solar on site or off site, doesn't mean that it needs to be for illuminating spaces where we don't need that light. So the lumens are for humans, unless you're talking about um, uh, it's something for plant growth, which is also a super big topic in California. And in the last cycle was one of the most exciting lighting topics that we worked on was for controlled environment horticulture and the introduction of metric micromoles per joule and considering what type of controls could be layered on without disrupting production. So if you don't need it at that time, then I still think efficiency is such an important topic to consider, and lighting controls play directly into that. It's an important coupling. So let's not get distracted by the shiny new thing. Let's only generate or store what we actually need to use to make the space a great place to live or work.
So now, talking about horticultural, though, I mean, that's a topic we haven't really touched on before. I'm curious, what your perspective is on lighting controls for horticultural purposes versus human purposes.
Well, I am not at the center of these facilities, not even close. And the ones that I've toured, I mean, they're really experimenting with, can we move away from traditional legacy illumination sources, high pressure sodium? Can we move to LED from metal halide or ceramic metal halide? So there's a lot of experimentation going on there, and controls to offer the right amount of light for whatever crop is being cultivated at that time, at whatever stage that crop is. Lighting controls, I think, play a really important role, but they're developing to be specific for those that industry. So I think that as a code, we felt that it was time, because there were so many of these facilities throughout California. And recently, this was also introduced into 90.1 and went through as an addendum, that it was time to introduce some boundaries around the amount of energy that you should be using for these industrial processes. But I want to be really careful not to disrupt what those growers need to continue to improve their processes and produce a better yield, whether that be crops for strawberries, microgreens, lettuces, flowers, or cannabis-related crops.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting, and I think it's really wise to make that distinction between horticultural industry versus human needs for lighting, because the requirements are so different, and I think it was wise to not put these strict restrictions on there, because it's also limiting what a industry can achieve with with the lighting that they're using. So ultimately, I think it sounds like it's great that you guys are really trying to tap into the knowledge of the people who are implementing it. But at the same time, it is a huge draw of energy. We're pumping a lot of power into these facilities that are growing in plants indoors. So having some way of capping that so that it's not wasted, but at the same time, it's still able to be utilized. So, it's a difference between visual acuity versus functional illumination for growth. We can say, okay, yeah, this is your LPD for a private office because that's what people can use for sight. But it's really interesting that each stage of plant life is going to have a different LPD requirement almost.
A different lighting power requirement, as well as perhaps some spectral content that is necessary, and then also intensity. So we're doing our best to collect data We also understand that the right lighting could be proprietary secret. So, where we share our results in public reports on title24stakeholders.com. These reports go to a public agency. So we know that our research is only as good as the expert advice that we get. So we just hope we're casting a net far enough to get the right info to set the right baseline. And time of day is also really important. Demand management. Yeah. So, I mean, if these facilities are using energy during the most constrained times of day on the California grid, then, are they able to participate in kind of mitigating some of that grid strain while we continually improve the electric grid to serve a growing need? In California, you may have heard of, across the country, actually, especially with our current federal administration, electrification is becoming more of a common word. So, with the growth in electrical load, we're going to need an adaptable and reliable grid. And controlled environment horticulture also is a part of that as a growing large user.
So for our listeners to understand, you use the word electrification, and I know a lot of people assume what that means, but I'm just curious what your definition is for it right now. I mean, it's a changing term, I realize, but just curious how you would define it.
So over 60 communities in the state of California have opted to adopt ordinances to look at some aspect of new construction in their communities. And now we're starting to see some come through for retrofits as well, where they're saying, moving forward, we're going to phase out fossil gas and we're going to rely on electricity to illuminate. I mean, we haven't used the gas lamp in most California communities.
Sure.
There's one in the foothills that had some street lighting until really recently. But nonetheless, so for lighting and lighting controls, that's old news. But for space conditioning and for water heating, there's a movement and cooking towards using only electric appliances. And electrification to me means moving towards that direction. It would be great for the kind of gas grid if things happened kind of all at once. Like the new building was not, oh, I'm all electric, except for those cooktops in each of those apartments. Instead, it was all means all. That way, gas infrastructure being built isn't serving a small load, but yet over the next 30 years, society has to pay back that investment. It's the math may not work. So for electrification, for me, it represents that movement towards electricity as the primary way to heat water, cook food, and condition our spaces. So,
yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I talk with several other colleagues who are part of this effort to research electrification and whether or not our grid can support complete electrification. So, it's really fascinating to hear it from the perspective of, code officials and the utilities, because, it definitely is a boon to the utilities, but at the same time, it's a huge pressure on the utilities at the same time. So having a way of reducing your electrical footprint to support the grid is almost a necessity. If we were to, if say for instance tomorrow we were to electrify everything, could the grid support it? Probably not. We would have to expand its capabilities.
It also depends on when you're using it. And I think that's another way that lighting controls can play an important role. Sure. In California's code, in the energy code, we have requirements for the ability of the lighting system to respond to a demand response event. But demand response in the past has, in my opinion, been thought of more as there's a crisis, please reduce, and it's been enrollment in a program. But demand management could happen all the time, winter months, summer months, but critically in the summer months, so that even though we've switched to LEDs, and I've heard this argument before, oh, the lighting footprint is so much smaller now that we're LEDs, so does it really make a difference? And having dedicated a lot of my thinking and time to efficiency, my answer is still absolutely yes, that it can. Why not? Reduce that load. Plus, lighting controls that tie to other systems, plug loads, as well as space conditioning and unified building energy management systems. Then you have a singular system or a space by space system that can make a real impact. And it doesn't mean, working in the dark. Tunability. And now we can bring in the luminaires, making sure that those luminaires do have a really nice kind of dimming curve, so that when we bring down that power, then it's a gentle reduction in light and it's not a drastic stepped, what happened? Is something going on?
Sure.
I think that that's possible, almost commonplace now, and a great idea for demand management using lighting.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned, right, is something we touch on a lot, the holistic building control, right? So one of the big things that Webster and I have been talking about multiple times with people is exactly that. We're not just looking at lighting, but we're looking at the ability to use the sensors in the space, especially in the summer in California, I'm sure with all the air conditioners, right? If there's no one in the space, not only are we turning the lights off or dimming them down, but we can adjust the temperature accordingly and pull the HVAC back and adjust all the other mechanical and plug loads, as you suggested, to reduce that demand on the utility grid. So the potential benefits are so much greater for holistic building control than just lighting, and getting everyone to understand that is probably quite a task. So how are you guys trying to tackle that?
And when you say you guys, are you referring to the code team or the utility?
Ooh, that's a great question. Maybe both. That's a great
Yeah, I'd be
question.
curious to hear both.
Yeah.
All right, I'll start with my own wheelhouse, which is the codes team.
Sure.
One of the questions is, what's the benefit? Our fundamental working purpose is to reduce energy still. However, as our energy story changes and evolves, we're also looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And for example, with the movement towards all electric, one may say, well, that's not really reducing demand. It's kind of switching the story. So as our scope expands, then looking at greenhouse gas emissions reductions also becomes more important. So we can start to look at code requirements that speak to that as equally as it does just to efficiency advancements. So there is a caveat, though, and that's cost effectiveness. So the proposals that we bring forward to the Energy Commission, they really do need to pencil out that they are cost effective. Right now, that's still tied to those efficiency advancements. But in the future, and it might also be, okay, is it efficacious from a greenhouse gas emissions reductions perspective? So that may open the door for us to be a little bit more creative in requiring these systems. But in the past few cycles, we have seen that cost is still a barrier. And I also, from a code perspective, think that there's opportunities for the Energy Commission or for our team or for partner teams like the CEA or CLTC to make strong recommendations to improve those commissioning requirements and to make sure that the requirements are clear and achievable from the acceptance testing perspective. So that's one of the ways that I think about these complex lighting systems and where their place may be in the code. Clean up the code, make sure it's approachable, and then also make sure that we we are advancing the code requirements so that they can reduce demand and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we still need those costs to pencil out. So that's one of our challenges. The other thing is persistent savings. It's really hard to prove that over time, when a lot of that data is trapped at the building level, or it's like, well, that company or that culture or those particular occupants, and what if they change? And what if that company sells the building and the new occupants are like, psh, control schmoles, and then it doesn't generate the benefits. So it's pretty tough sometimes, the burden of proof to show that over time they continue to do their work. I believe in them, but yeah, it's got to be a good research paper too.
Sure. Well, so there was an interesting thing that you touched on briefly, which was, the fossil fuel, the carbon offsets from going from, for instance, a gas-based power to an electrical power. And you said you were going to do some research into whether the shift to electrification justifies that. Has there been research done on that?
There is continual research done on that, on whether or not moving to electrification will reap the societal benefits, especially in the area of climate science and climate goals. In California, we have a pretty clean grid. In other areas of the United States, there may still be coal-fired power plants. There may still be a lot of natural gas-fired power plants, but mainly the coal. In those areas, there are arguments that if the electricity comes from burning coal, then if you move to electrification, are you really achieving your benefits?
That's
I still
exactly the
think it's
argument that I've heard.
Yeah, I still think it's important to move in that direction. And well, this is not my area of expertise on how
Sure.
many of those coal-fired power plants are out there. But from the information that I follow, it seems like the trend is moving away from them. So as that trend continues, then the benefits are there. But also if you couple with efficiency, right? So if you move towards a more efficient system and you demand less, whether it be from their generation source that is an older source like coal, or whether it be from solar, you still need less to do the job. So another
No,
plug for efficiency.
that's for sure. No, so I'm gonna throw a major curveball at you because I'm curious. If you were to take a time machine and go 50 years into the future, what do you think building management systems would look like with lighting controls?
That I don't know if it's a curveball. It's just a ball. It's just, do I answer this in a fantastical way?
Hey, go for it. I'm
So,
just curious because I think you are definitely on the forefront and you're seeing a lot of research coming in and you're dealing with the changes that are happening on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just curious, with all the information you have right now, what do you think we're going to have for technology in 50 years from now?
well, I sure hope the technology is something that we no longer hear the argument that the building facility manager doesn't have time to troubleshoot and to fix because those systems are more intuitive. I would love to see more of that coming together of the building energy systems. So you use the word holistic. I would love to see the holistic. I would also love to see, particularly with the lighting, more of a personal preference that it would respond to the time of day and the wellness needs, that the users would really have a say on how their space is illuminated. If I'm going to go way out there, then buildings will recognize the value of daylight for their occupants if we are still all working in these kind of central hub buildings.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so I'm not saying anything super innovative here. I think it's just more of a wish that that we're using the spaces differently, the walls, the ceiling, the windows. The luminaires no longer look like a light bulb. We've moved on to using LEDs and whatever comes next in a way that really brings light into a space in a subtle way and is controllable. Just give the user and the building manager a way to create the right intensity and the right spectral content for the users throughout the day, and make that system intuitive. And if there's so many different ways to try and connect all these systems into one management system that kind of runs the building, if we continue to kind of have all these fractured components, well, I'm lighting and I'm water heating, then
Yes.
we may not see that. So my ideal world is that it's more intuitive. The facility manager is like, oh yeah, I have it dialed in for each day of the year. It's connected to the weather. The lighting is not necessarily all dangling from cords from the ceiling, but is filling the space in beautiful ways. And the users have a say in how they can experience the space. How was
No,
that?
I think that that's great, and I think it really responds to a lot of the sentiments that we get on this podcast, which is that user interfaces are clunky and hard to deal with, and I think you've hit on, like, the very first topic you hit on was perfect for our industry to focus on, because adoption of lighting controls at the core is dependent upon the user experience. A specifier can draw up the best idea for a lighting control system that not only meets code but exceeds code and does all these amazing things. But if the users walk into the space and they don't understand any of it, and they see all the lights flashing on and off and they don't realize what it's doing, they're going to try to override it as quickly as possible and move on with their lives. So, having an intuitive system really is a critical thing for our industry to start working towards.
I think it might be also important to discuss the exterior environment. So I'm still hearing a lot of dissent and disbelief that sensors on outdoor luminaires are performing as they need to be. Last code cycle received some messages, and I know the Energy Commission received some pushback that pole-based lighting controls to control outdoor lighting, they're not working, they're not being installed, it's not being enforced, persons are disabling them. I'd really love to see us get over that hurdle. There is just no reason to be illuminating massive parking lots, especially in retail areas, where there aren't persons there in the evening. But if someone needs to be there, they need adequate light, they need the right quality of light. But if they're not there, why is it on? I think as an industry, there's some improvement there. Last cycle, we did some research. Could we start to look at pole heights, mounting heights higher than 24 feet? What's new out there? Did the exterior network lighting controls kind of present that great solution that could be codified? It's the advancements haven't quite been there yet. But eliminating light trespass while at the same time providing a comfortable night lighting environment, I think we might have gone a little backwards on that as an industry.
Interesting to hear that from you. Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm just curious, you said you were getting reports about stuff not working. Is there anything that you can see as a trend as to why stuff isn't working?
I wish I could have a concise answer for that. I live in the world of larger pools of data, and those larger pools of data seem to be elusive. Anecdotal evidence when it comes to, say, someone writing a letter or standing up at the podium or in our virtual environment, turning on their camera and making a comment in a rulemaking meeting, still carries some weight for people to say, at this facility, it didn't work. But those large pools of data, they're not manifesting. I wish I could say that. So for now, it's a lot of rumors or smaller instances, but they're adding up to concern. So I think that it's worth having those sensors working, but I'm a little disheartened to hear so many stories of them being bypassed. And also the whole thing about, well, it's LED, I don't need it. That is also still seems to be lingering in the background, and that's been the case for 7, 8, 9 years now that we've been
Wow.
hearing that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely getting to a point where it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, you still you see a lot of parking lots, right? And garages too. Garages are brutal. I can't tell you how many different garages I walk into, and you look up and you can see that there are sensors, and but all the lights are on everywhere you look, even when there's no one around. It's so that's definitely, and like you said, people say, oh well, it's LED, it doesn't matter. Well, that's great, except when you take that one garage and turn it into 10,000 garages, and that's a lot of money that's just being wasted, and a lot of demand on the grid for no reason.
yeah, and nighttime grid demand is has a different flavor now. You know, when I first started in lighting, then it was maybe cheaper, but now it's the part of the day that doesn't benefit from those solar contributions.
Right.
So we have a new nighttime peak where pricing will inspire a little bit more reduction during those nighttime hours in the future. It can't speculate, but that's when energy may become a little more pricey. Um, yeah, the parking garages, not to mention the light trespass, where we
Hmm.
have housing issues in many areas of the country, and especially in California. And in our urban centers, we might have a multifamily building adjacent to that garage. So,
Right.
why illuminate someone's apartment and force those blackout shades inside if they don't need it, if it's not needed? So,
Yep.
No, and so I think, ultimately that does sound like the next step for lighting controls to kind of try to focus on, because it almost sounds similar to the issue where when photo sensors first got introduced and people would take the clear tape and just disable the daylight sensor inside their office. It sounds like they're going the same route with exterior controls, and so maybe we need to try to refine that and make it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more easier, a little bit more friendly for the occupants of the spaces. I think another thing that I've heard before is security concerns, and so unless you're blasting the space with light, it's not safe, or at least there's the perception of it not being safe. And I think that needs to be addressed, whether or not it's true. People need to feel safe in a space.
yeah, that's true. However, thinking back to my days prior to PG&E at CLTC at UC Davis, um, having that illumination change when you enter a space where it brightens and where you are, um, you know, there's benefit to that too. When I enter I'll go back inside or in the parking garage, a stairwell that is dark. I know that nobody else has moved in there for a little while if those sensors are performing as
No, that's a
as
good
planned.
point.
And so when you open the
Yep.
door and the lights brighten, then you're like, okay, I feel comfortable, more comfortable here. At least I do, because you'd have to stand really, really still not to move your heat across those zones if you had PIR sensors in a stairwell. So I think we need to keep bringing. I would like to see more success stories and, hey, I installed these and they're working. That customers like them, they feel safe. If those big stories are out there, especially from large installations, make that data known,
Mm.
make it public, bring it to the forefront again, and refresh and say, okay, we've had this practice in place for a decade. How's it going? Let's check in.
Mhm.
And if a technology flaw does exist, then maybe also those case studies and bringing that story forward will inspire those industry manufacturers or innovators to say, it didn't go as planned. Maybe we can let's re-examine this. So.
Mhm. No, absolutely. Well, we're almost out of time here, but I just want to kind of package up what we've talked about here. We've kind of covered a lot of different areas and not necessarily lighting control specific, but when it comes to your perspective, you're dealing a lot with energy codes and how the utilities are using those energy codes, how the community is adapting with those energy codes, what needs to be improved upon them, or what is working so far. So, in California, there's really kind of this gold standard with energy code application and implementation and follow through, which I think the rest of the country could really benefit from if they follow that model. But from your perspective, it seems as though at least there is a little bit of a trickle down of that information through the countries, and ASHRAE 90.1, IECC, those two groups are working parallel to California to kind of transcend and push forward the point of energy code, which the whole point of it is to reduce wasted energy, not just so that the person who is occupying the space saves money, but also so that the grid strain can be reduced and overall climate change hopefully can be mitigated. But at the same time, there are challenges that need to be overcome that you have absolutely no control over. But all you can do is collect the data and assess and at least adapt the code to be able to address any of the concerns that you do have direct control over. But at the same time, you're going to create something, and that's going to get reviewed by various people to make sure that not only is it of sound logic, but it also is efficient, it's monetarily possible, and that overall it will benefit climate change mitigation. So you're really at the heart of everything that goes on when it comes to these sorts of decision making points. But it takes a whole community to be able to achieve what you've been able to achieve over the last since the beginning of the implementation of energy code. So I think it's really a fantastic level of work that you've been able to put forward, and I'm really excited to see as things evolve, as the industry changes and technologies are innovated, to see what comes of it. But I think it's really all exciting stuff.
Well, I think you've summed up what I spend every day thinking about really well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, whether it be from local ordinances to the state code, or my small role on the 90.1 lighting subcommittee, or or lighting and power now, and also trying to watch IECC better. So yeah, that's a great summary of what we're working on, what we're trying to do. We do have a tremendous amount of data that we've collected and published on title24stakeholders.com, whether it be about limiter efficacy or controls availability, what we use in our cost effectiveness equations. We hope the lighting community will benefit from looking through that archive. We have a lot of years worth of information out there. And we need the lighting community to chime in and say, you're off base, or I've got information for you, to write a letter of support for a proposal, or point out that exterior lighting controls are working if they are, help us understand if they're not. So it's symbiotic, and I believe in a holistic model with many voices participating in this process.
Well, Kelly, thank you so
So,
much for joining us. Yeah, I've got a cat here.
well, I don't know if you heard mine in the background about
Nope.
15-20 minutes ago. Okay, but she chimed in as well. So.
Well, again, thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a really interesting conversation. I hope our listeners got a lot out of it. Energy code is such a dense topic that I really think we could bring you back in at a later date and time to talk further about, what's going on in the energy code world, especially when it comes to California, which is such a pinnacle for our country to follow. So thank you, and really got a lot out of this.
Yeah, and I just hope that some of your viewers will participate in the 2025 update process, even if to say, all right, stay the course. Thanks for not doing this or that, and especially for your maybe new lighting controls community members that are joining through the controlled environment horticulture space. So yeah, thank you so much for having me as a guest. I'm glad to hear you thought that the content was useful, and I'd be happy to join again in the future. Thank you.
Well, that was an awesome conversation with Kelly, and I hope you all got a lot out of it. I certainly did. But just a reminder that this episode is sponsored by McWong International Incorporated. They've been in the business for over 30 years, working with lighting control solutions, and they have a North American-based team ready to support any of the projects that you might have. Again, they have pioneered Bluetooth mesh controls with their award-winning solutions. They have comprehensive DLC certified product offerings, and they are code compliant based for any new or retrofit projects that you have in mind. So check out McWong International Incorporated.
Yeah, and you can find all that information and more at McWongInc.com. That's McWongInc.com for their website. And please remember, as always, this episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, financially supported by NAILD, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. And please do not forget to check out the lightingcontrolspodcast.com for all of our episodes, for additional merch. And thank you again, Kelly. What a fantastic episode. We'll see you guys soon.